and welcome to this Astranti video looking at an exciting new product, the Objective Test Debrief videos. And this particular video is going to be focusing on the questions for the P2 syllabus. And in this video I'm going to look at some of the key tips coming out of my creation and analysis of these P2 questions, and we'll also go through a sample as well. So we'll start by looking at what the Objective Test Debrief videos are. Well, for P2 we have 100 questions that are all based around the kinds of representative task statements that you will get in your actual exam. So they're very similar to the questions that you'll get in your actual exam, and they are broken down by chapter. So we've got 21 chapters across P2, and we've got questions for each of those chapters. And in those analysis videos, we're going to go through the questions, give them a full analysis, picking out key bits of information, breaking the tasks down, and also working through the various steps to answer the questions correctly. And we'll also explain why the correct answer was the correct answer, but also why the incorrect answers were not the correct answer. So a really useful tool for learning how to answer P2 questions and updating your own approach to the P2 questions. And from my experience as a P2 tutor for many years, and also from creating all these questions around the representative task statements, I've got three main tips to be aware of when it comes to the P2 questions and the P2 exam. And that is that the P2 exam has a lot of calculations. So you must be adept at answering calculation questions. You must know the formulas, you must know the processes and the calculations for answering those questions. But also, you must watch out for unnecessary information. A question might have a lot of figures in it, and you might be thinking that you need to use all those figures. Whereas actually there might be subtle hints that suggest you don't need to use a particular figure, or it could be that there are figures that have been thrown in and are not relevant to the calculation whatsoever. And finally, make sure you always read the specific requirement line carefully. And a lot of students will skip through the question, they'll pick out some bits of information, and they'll assume what the requirement is. And as a result, they'll answer the question they think they have gotten rather than the question that they have actually gotten. And sometimes the specific requirement line will just change the focus of the question in a way that you perhaps didn't anticipate given the information that preceded it. So always make sure you pick out the specific requirements very carefully. And it may sound simple, but under exam pressures, under exam conditions, it's remarkably easy to misinterpret the questions. Those would be my three main tips following on from my creation and analysis of these 100 P2 questions. So what we're going to do now is go through a sample question and demonstrate these tips, but also demonstrate how we would undertake an analysis of a question. And this is representative of what you'll get in the pack. And the question will look like this, and you can see that we've got the syllabus reference here, and this is an actual representative task statement from the P2 syllabus. So you will have questions in your P2 exam that are about calculating relevant cash flows, including taking into account tax, inflation, working capital, etc. So let's take a look at the question. And remember to keep in mind those three tips that I mentioned. The first thing we can see is that it is a calculation. We are being asked to give our final answer to the nearest roller, which is the currency that is being used in the question. But those other two tips were to remember to look out for unnecessary information, and also to really specifically read the requirements because it might not always be obvious. So let's take a look through the question. Anthony is conducting a net present value analysis on the following figures from Project Y. Now, of course, we're already thinking, is this a net present value question? And are we going to be asked to calculate a net present value? We don't know yet because we haven't read the specific requirement line. But the question is somewhat leading us down that route. So be mindful of that, just as I said before. It's not always obvious what is being asked of you. He works for a company called ZA10, which is based in Royland, and there is the Royland currency, the roller. We've got 3 years here in our calculation or in our information. We've got buildings, fittings and equipment, the maintenance cost of the project, and then finally the revenues of the project. And in Royland, there is a 25% tax deductible allowance available for capital expenditures, and the tax rate is at 20%. Now, this, of course, is something you will have learnt in your syllabus, that in certain jurisdictions, for example, in the UK, it's possible for organisations to reduce their tax bill by deducting an allowance from certain purchased items. So we know that this is possible. We know that we can deduct from our tax bill by taking into account capital expenditures. And the question is now specifically asking us, what entry will Anthony put for tax saving in year 3 when conducting his analysis, given that he plans to apply this allowance to fittings and equipment and the cost of capital is 10%. So there's a lot of important information here, and there's a lot of unnecessary information here. For example, the maintenance and the revenue costs are not relevant. We are not calculating a net present value. We are looking for the tax saving entry in year 3. And we're not even looking for the tax or the tax saving in year 3. We're looking for the entry in tax saving for year 3. Which actually means we're looking for the tax that is saved in year 2, because the tax benefit is received 1 year in arrears. So it's behind. So it's looking at all these very specific little bits of information in the question that is important. So let's go about calculating the answer to this question now. Well, the allowance on capital is calculated by multiplying the value of an asset by the allowance rate. Now, if you just interpret it as capital expenditures, you might be adding together the fittings and equipment and the buildings. But of course, it's only going to be used for the fittings and the equipment. So that's the figure that we need to use here, $1,500,000. So let's write this figure down here. So we've got $1,500,000. And the allowance rate is at 25%. So in the first year, because remember we need to work towards the second year because we will be using the tax saving from the first year. So we multiply this by 25%, and that will give us the figure that is eligible for the tax saving. So $1,500,000 multiplied by 25% is $375,000. So that is the amount of capital expenditure that we could potentially apply the 20% tax saving to in year 1. So of course, we don't actually need to calculate the tax saving for year 1 because it's not relevant to answering the question. But what we do need to do is deduct this figure from the initial purchase price of the capital expenditure to get the new balance, because otherwise we would be applying a tax saving against an expenditure that we've already applied a tax saving to. So what we need to do is deduct the $375,000 from the $1,500,000 to give our new balance of $1,125,000. And so this is the capital expenditure that we can now apply the tax deductible allowance for year 2, which again is 25%. So $1,125,000 multiplied by 25% gives us $281,250. And now we can calculate the tax saving by multiplying this by the tax rate, which is 20%. So $281,250 multiplied by 20% gives us a figure of $56,250. So this is the tax saving on capital expenses in year 2. And of course, we're looking for the entry for tax saving in year 3, bearing in mind that tax benefit is received 1 year in arrears. So actually, the tax saving from year 2 will be the entry in year 3. And that is the answer. The tax saving is $56,250. So some very important bits of information in here that we had to pick out, and lots of information that was not relevant. For example, the buildings, the maintenance, the revenue, the cost of capital, as well the fact that we said it was a net present value analysis, etc. All of these things may have thrown you off. Whereas actually, the question that you needed to answer was quite straightforward. It was a simple tax calculation. So you can see those 3 tips in action there, that it's very important to identify the information you actually need and also the really specific requirement. So I hope you enjoyed that sample and you can see how it will help you out, and you can see the process. We didn't go through it in quite as much detail as we would for each of the questions in the full objective test video debrief, but you should at least have an idea of it. But if you would like more information and you would like more samples, then please visit the website www.astranti.com, where the first 3 full chapters will be available online for you to view. So the first 3 chapters of the P2 objective test videos, and also the full 21 chapter set is available now. So please do check that out. The video series will be really useful for anyone who is sitting at their P2 objective tests and needs help with their questions and needs help with exam practice. So do go ahead and check that out.